Did you ever notice this rather peculiar paradox? The most multicultural societies on Earth are also, seemingly, the most racist societies on Earth. Yes, if you listen to minorities and race-baiting groups living in Europe or the United States. Those two regions of the world are the most racist societies in the world. Now, this leads to two possibilities. Either they are right, in which case they have proven that multiculturalism is an abject failure, that forcing people with different cultural backgrounds to live together only leads to tensions and resentment, or they are liars, and the West is not the most racist part of the world. Of course, the progressive world is strife with paradoxes. Nearly every single ideological battle pushed by the progressives leads to a direct paradox they simply brush under the carpet, because they're unable to handle two separate concepts at once and understand the incompatibility of those concepts. But where do those progressive paradoxes come from? Why are leftist ideologies jam-packed with paradoxes? How come conservatives are not pestered with paradoxes? For one reason, really, which can be summarized as narrative versus reality. See, progressives and leftists have always based their entire worldview on theoretical notions. Communism, for instance, is perhaps the very best example of this. Communism simply did not exist until Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels theorized the idea of a communist society out of thin air. We all know the results. A combined 100 million deaths in all the countries in which communism has been tried, moribund economies, and countries that only exist thanks to tyranny, authoritarianism, and dictatorships. Conservatives, on the other hand, are extremely down-to-earth people. What has been working for thousands of years will still work for thousands of years to come. If mankind, and all mammals for that matter, has prospered accepting the fact that there are only two sexes, and that gender is a non-parameter, why would you suddenly want to waste your time with thousands of made-up genders that only exist in some people's minds, but have no bearing on reality, and only serve to confuse the hell out of everyone? Mainly those afflicted with this quote-unquote gender fluidity. But I digress. If you've ever traveled around the world, you know that the West is by far the very least racist region in the world. Only a person who's never traveled outside of the West would dare make the claim that the West may be racist. In Japan, for instance, you will still find Japanese-only establishments in Hong Kong, the most progressive city in Asia. You'll find apartments for rent to Chinese only. Although it's officially forbidden, nobody bats an eyelid about those signs. In mainland China, entire ethnic groups, among whom the Uyghurs and Tibetans, to name only the most famous examples, are re-educated to become quote-unquote good Chinese citizens. If you're black in China, no, you definitely don't want to be black in China. You'll be treated worse than a dog. As for Africa, well, you often hear or read about Africans killing other Africans whose sole crime it is to be members of other ethnic groups. But sure, let's call Westerners racists. Now, what do all those unapologetically racist countries have in common? They're ethno-states, meaning that over 95% of the population belongs to one specific ethnic group. More importantly, however, if you call them racists, they simply shrug their shoulders and carry on. And if you become too much of a nuisance, you are imprisoned and deported. It's that simple. The West has opted for a diametrically opposite approach: tolerance. No matter what foreigners do. In the West, tolerance and openness has become the norm. A teenager committing a string of felonies ends up killed by a police officer nearby Paris? The only possible explanation is that he got killed because the French police are racist. His criminal behavior has, obviously, no bearing with the fatal outcome. Riots erupt in France, causing billions of dollars worth of damages. Let them rampage the cities and ask the French population to chip in for the costs. Oh, and if you're the Minister of the Interior, put the blame on the French youth, of course. A black American man with quite the criminal history, loaded on fentanyl, tries to pass a counterfeit bill, refuses to comply with the police, and ends up dying from an overdose. Let's put the blame on the police. They must, obviously, be racist. The fact the criminal had ingested a lethal dose of fentanyl and committed a crime is, obviously, not the cause of his death. Only racism is. The riots that ensued, the 30 people that got killed by Antifa and BLM rioters, let's turn a blind eye on those. The American police are so racist that they let them burn, loot, and murder at will. I mean, those were fiery but mostly peaceful riots. After all. Am I right? Imagine if those quote-unquote protests hadn't been peaceful. Now try that in China and see how it goes for you. Pakistani men grooming, raping, and forcing tens of thousands of teenage white girls, often as young as 13, into prostitution? Let's brush it under the rug, or people will think the British police are racists for arresting child rapists. Tens of thousands of German women are sexually assaulted, some of whom raped, on New Year's Eve 2015 in Germany by North Africans and Syrian quote-unquote refugees, right after Merkel opened the German borders to the entire world? Let's brush it under the rug. Or people will think that German police are racist for arresting sexual offenders and rapists. Sweden turning into the rape capital of Europe, recording rape rates comparable to those recorded in South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, or Nicaragua? Let's put anyone who dares publish ethnic statistics on criminality in Sweden in prison, because reporting criminals in Sweden is an obvious act of racism. Of course, in the West, any foreign quote-unquote refugee who lands on the shores of Europe or the United States has automatically right to help from the country he ends up in. Giving housing allowances and other financial help to foreigners is normal in the West. Try and ask for financial help as a foreigner in China, Japan, South Korea, or any other Asian country, and see how you'll be dealt with. Yet, Westerners are racists. This begs the question, why are people so adamant that the West is racist, but never question the racism prevalent in other countries when, by every possible metric, the West is the most tolerant region in the world, the most accommodating region in the world, and the only region in the world that happily destroys its own culture to make way for alien cultures? The answer is simple. 21st century Westerners are weak, and predators can sense weakness. Hyenas can smell weakness in injured zebras. Vultures can smell weakness in sick sheep. Likewise, humans can smell weakness in other humans. And that is exactly what is at play today in the West. In the 19th century, Western countries were respected all around the world. Western nations were the dominant force, and owned, so to speak, the entire world. Why? Because Western nations were culturally strong nations. Unfortunately, since then, leftist theories, which include self-loathing and self-destruction, have taken hold all over the West. We are now reaping what the left has been sowing for the last 60 years. Weakness and decay. The rest of the world has caught on this self-inflicted destruction, and they have picked up on our main weakness, racism. Westerners are so petrified at the notion of being called racists that they cannot assert themselves anymore. Why do you think foreigners wield the racism card like our ancestors wielded their longswords in the West, but nowhere else in the world? Because racism has become the Westerners' kryptonite. We are petrified at the idea someone may call us racists. As a result, we have been caving into the least demand of foreigners. Unfortunately, as the saying goes, give one an inch, they'll take a mile. That's exactly what we are witnessing today. The only reason why the entire world bullies the West into believing that the West is racist is because the West agrees with this false accusation. The more Europe asks forgiveness for colonialism, the more African nations and Africans living in Europe will ask for reparations in one form or another. The more the United States asks for forgiveness for slavery, the more Black Americans will ask for reparations in one form or another. And it's working. Why? Because Westerners have become weak. The stench of weakness the West exudes is unbearable to any conservative, and irresistible to the rest of the world. The West, quite incredibly, has turned from lion into crippled lamb in less than a century. And the little pride we could take in our glorious past is carefully being erased from our own history books by power-hungry progressives without a shred of honor and respect for their ancestors' culture.